Who would ever expect someone to attack their own spouse, to try to rape the person they're married to? When we talk about serial killers, most of us like to believe that kind of evil stays far away from us, that it happens somewhere else to someone else. We tell ourselves we'll never come face to face with a real monster. But in a small town, a town with barely 50,000 people, that logic falls apart. In a place like that, the victim could be anyone, even the serial killer's own wife, a woman her husband no longer recognized. Today's story takes us to a small town called Absheronsk, in Russia's Krasnodar region, and it starts with a man who seemed completely ordinary, a quiet firefighter, not someone who stood out. He built his house with his own hands and lived there with his wife and their 2 children. He loved hunting. His wife later said that some nights, without any warning, he'd head straight into the forest after dark. He'd tell her he just wanted to check his traps. But there was always something strange about it because he almost never came back with any real game. What came out later was far more disturbing. Animals were never his real target. People were. Young women, elderly women, even schoolgirls. He waited for them outside the city limits, lying in ambush. Some he forced into attacks. Others he killed with extreme brutality. During these attacks, he wore a mask, a black balaclava, the kind firefighters wear under their helmets. And that detail earned him a nickname. People started calling him Fantomas, after the main character of a French movie who wore a similar mask. He watched women in forests and in quiet, empty alleyways. If they resisted, he killed them. If a woman was with a man, he demanded that the man hand her over. And if the man tried to defend her, Fantomas shot him with a hunting rifle. Before we go any further, I want to ask you to like the video and leave a comment. Just remember, your like isn't for this horrific story. It's for the work that went into putting this video together. Back in the early 1970s, Absheronsk was a calm, sparsely populated town. Serious crime was rare. Most of the time, the worst things people dealt with were pickpocketing or family arguments. Then came the summer of 1973. It was one of those perfect sunny days, the kind that feels made for a long walk. Yevgeny and his fiancée, Soda, decided to go into the forest for a picnic. They just wanted some privacy, some time alone together. What they didn't know was that someone else was already there, waiting. A masked man had been following them, step by step, staying in the shadows. Eventually, he came closer and, completely calm, said just one thing, "Give me the girl." Soda froze. She was too terrified to move. Yevgeny begged him to leave them alone. He tried to stand in front of her, tried to stop him. But Fantomas ended it with a single shot. Right there, next to the body of the man she loved, he forced Soda to have sex. Afterward, he didn't even bother trying to hide the body or cover his tracks. He simply left it there and walked away. What makes this even more tragic is that Yevgeny had returned from military service just a few weeks earlier. He was planning to propose to Soda. His life was only just beginning, and it ended in the most horrific way imaginable. That moment marked the beginning of a chain of brutal rapes and murders. A chain that would last for 4 years. Investigators didn't reach the scene until the next morning. By then, the area around the body was covered in footprints. It was clear the killer had been there for hours, standing completely still, watching the couple before he attacked. And everyone kept asking the same question. Why would someone do this to a young couple? At first, the main theory was a love triangle. Yevgeny had spent 2 years in the army, and investigators thought that during that time, Soda might have attracted the attention of another man, someone who couldn't handle being rejected. Detectives determined that the killer's shoe size was a 43. When they questioned Soda, she couldn't describe his face because of the mask, but some details stayed with her. She said he spoke softly, almost gently. He even told her that if she became pregnant, he would marry her. After hearing that, the love triangle theory started to sound more believable. The investigation continued until a small but crucial detail turned up near the crime scene. A torn piece of paper. It was a page ripped out of a magazine. And that became the most important clue. Investigators began checking libraries and eventually came across the name Yulia Nikiforova. She had returned magazines multiple times with pages torn out. Officers went straight to her home, ready to arrest her, when her mother suddenly stepped forward and said something no one expected. Yulia herself had been a victim of Fantomas. That day, Yulia had gone out to fetch water from the neighborhood pump. It was dark. The street was empty, quiet. Out of nowhere, someone grabbed her by the throat from behind and dragged her toward the bushes. Yulia managed to fight back. She picked up a stick and hit him hard. The attacker was wearing a mask. When she started screaming, 2 local men came running, and that's what made him flee. After that, detectives started to suspect the real number of victims was much higher, that many women had simply never reported the attacks. Yevgeny's murder case was still open when another crime happened. By then, the whole region had heard the name Fantomas. But the Kotov family believed nothing like that could ever happen to them. That day, the Kotovs, the father, the mother, and their daughter, had gone into the forest to gather wild pears and sorrel. Suddenly, they heard a voice say, "Give me the girl." When they turned around, they saw a masked man standing there with a gun. The mother begged him to take her instead of her daughter. Right there, in front of her husband and child, Fantomas raped the woman. But he didn't back down from his original demand. He asked for the daughter again. This time, thankfully, the girl wasn't harmed. Even though no one resisted, Fantomas pulled back. Not because he couldn't do it, but because the situation was no longer fully under his control. A few weeks later, another attack. That night, Vladimir was out with his girlfriend, Anna. They were walking near a lake, completely unaware that a masked man was watching them from the bushes. Minutes later, an armed man stepped out, raised his weapon, and shot Vladimir without hesitation. Then he raped Anna. After that, he went through Vladimir's pockets and disappeared. This new crime shook the town all over again. People in Absheronsk were terrified. Husbands started picking their wives up from work. Parents stopped letting their daughters go out at night. Police searched among acquaintances, neighbors, even former victims. They patrolled parks and forests nonstop, but nothing worked. Later, it turned out that one of the people taking part in those searches was the killer himself. The detectives in Absheronsk were working day and night. They set up ambushes, tried different strategies. At one point, they even sent out female officers as bait, short skirts, hidden radios, while other officers followed a few steps behind. Still, nothing. It wasn't that the police weren't trying. The problem was that the maniac knew how to stay invisible. A few months after the last murder, it happened again. Fantomas stopped a car, killed a taxi driver, and raped the woman who was with him. Once again, he used a hunting rifle. That pushed investigators toward a new conclusion. The killer was probably a hunter. They decided to use bait again. That night, Nina Kovalenko was chosen. Fantomas attacked so suddenly that the officer forgot she even had a gun. She didn't scream right away. He covered her mouth, and when she finally managed to shout, help came too late. After several failed ambushes, everyone had grown a little careless. Officers chased him, fired shots, but he got away. He escaped, but while running, he spotted a woman at a bus stop. He raped her too and then vanished again. Police created a detailed map of all the crime scenes. Since the attacks happened at different times of day and night, a new theory emerged. Fantomas might be a beekeeper or someone who collected medicinal herbs. The search circle was tightening. And then came one of the strangest moments in the entire case. A few days later, the monster went hunting again. That night, Galina left her work shift earlier than usual and headed home. She was in a hurry, constantly glancing over her shoulder at every sound, and for good reason. She was only about 100 meters from her house when Fantomas suddenly jumped out from behind a tree. He grabbed her by the throat, and her bag fell to the ground. Because she was so close to home, Galina screamed at the top of her lungs and called out for her son. Instantly, Fantomas let go and froze. Galina ran toward the house. He stayed right where he was, just standing there, staring. The monster was in shock, because only then did he realize the woman he had attacked was his own wife. There had never been a case like this in criminal history. Someone attacking their own spouse without recognizing her. What made it even worse was that afterward, He picked up the bag and the hat Galina had dropped during the attack and brought them home. When Galina saw her bag inside the house, she was horrified. And one thought flashed through her mind. What if my husband is the maniac? Galina did the only right thing. She went straight to the police. A few hours later, 3 police cars pulled up in front of the house for a search. The suspect wasn't home. He was on duty at the fire station. That's where he was arrested. Investigators later said the house was spotless. Family photos covered the walls. They found a gun, the same one they believed had been used to kill 3 men. It was legally owned, and at first glance, there were no solid clues. Until they noticed a watch on the son's wrist. A watch that most likely belonged to one of the victims. And then they found the Fantomas mask. The homeowner's name was Nikolai Druzanov. For years, the victims believed the attacker was wearing black women's tights over his head. But the truth was different. Nikolai carried out his crimes wearing a black firefighter's balaclava. He was born in 1940 in the village of Trinovka in the Stavropol region. In 1962, he married Galina, and they had 2 sons. In 1969, the family moved to Absheronsk. He wasn't a security guard or a herbal collector. He was a firefighter. In his free time, he worked odd jobs, helped build houses, and above all else, he loved hunting. He'd grab his gun and ammunition and disappear into the forest for 2 or 3 days at a time. On the surface, his everyday life looked completely ordinary. He did his job well. His family seemed normal. The only complaint came from his wife, who talked about his excessive sex drive. She said when he came home exhausted from a shift, he still wouldn't leave her alone. By all appearances, Nikolai was a positive, respected man. He'd received commendations at the fire station, took part in community activities, and was physically fit. His 15-year-old son, also named Nikolai, loved his father, but felt a strange, unexplainable hatred toward Fantomas. He became obsessed with finding him and killing him. He even made a homemade knuckle duster and talked to his father about plans to catch that bad man. Nikolai's sister also lived with them, along with her daughter. But Nikolai's attitude toward his niece was anything but warm or family-like. He constantly warned her, if Fantomas ever attacks you, don't resist. If you fight back, he'll kill you. The girl was terrified and told her aunt more than once that she didn't understand why her uncle kept scaring her with stories about Fantomas. But her aunt didn't take it seriously. The Druzanov family's life began to fall apart in 1972. Nikolai later admitted that he was no longer sexually satisfied with his wife. Galina was afraid of getting pregnant, and abortions had happened more than once. She had been suspicious of him for a long time. After work, he often disappeared, and some nights he didn't come home at all, blaming it on being busy with work. During interrogations, Nikolai said it himself, "My sex drive was extremely high. I had sex almost every day, but my wife hated it." That's when he started going to the outskirts of town, lying in wait for women. After killing 3 men, he sewed several masks for himself. One from his son's sports clothes, another from women's underwear. He pulled them over his head so he wouldn't be recognized. And it was that look that earned him the nickname of the main character from a famous French film. He watched women who were walking alone and attacked them under threat of death. In 1976, just 1 month apart, he raped the same woman twice. Talking about himself, he said, "I'm not a human being. I'm a beast. Begging doesn't work on me." Once, he even raped someone he knew personally, and afterward panicked, afraid he might be recognized. His wife later said, "One time I came home and he wasn't there. Then I found him hiding under the bed." He never explained why. According to the case files, Fantomas' wife had no idea who she was living with for all those years, until the attack on her changed everything. Galina went to the police and reported her suspicions. On March 1, 1977, Nikolai was arrested. He confessed to everything. With obsessive precision, he pointed out every single crime scene and described his victims in detail. During one crime scene reconstruction, he asked the officers to remove his handcuffs. The police agreed. As they walked deeper into the forest, Nikolai suddenly noticed a girl. It was Nina, the the same woman he had attacked earlier during a failed ambush. When everyone's attention drifted for a moment, he suddenly started running. But the strangest part came next. About a minute later, he came back, holding a bouquet of flowers. According to investigators, he had forced dozens of women into sex, and he could recognize many of them just by their voices. 3 men had been killed by him. Even so, not all victims could be identified in court. Officially, he was charged with 30 rapes and 3 murders. Many women never came forward, afraid of shame and social judgment. Because of that, investigators believe the real number of victims was at least twice as high. Women who spoke during the investigation said that after the assaults, Nikolai often tried to talk to them, to calm them down. He didn't torture them or beat them. According to them, he behaved with a strange kind of empathy. One woman even said that after the attack, he kissed her hands and tried to comfort her. His co-workers described him as a kind man, always ready to help. To his family, he seemed like a good father. Forensic psychiatrists declared Nikolai mentally healthy and fully responsible for his actions. He knew exactly what he was doing. The trial moved quickly, and in November 1978, the final verdict was announced: death by execution. The sentence was carried out a year later. In a letter to the judge, Nikolai wrote, "I am aware of my guilt. I promise to serve society and my country, to erase the stain, to make my sons proud of me. I am still young. I no longer want women. I will dedicate all my strength to work." After his execution, his wife asked the court to lift the seizure on their house. She wanted to sell it and leave Absheronsk with her sons. She did exactly that. And soon after, all traces of Fantomas' family disappeared.